There is a list buried inside a Sumerian clay tablet that academics have never fully published. Not because it is incomplete, because of what it contains. The tablet was recovered from the ruins of Nineveh in 1873. It came out of the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great Assyrian king, a man who collected texts the way some collect weapons. He had scribes travel across the known world copying older documents onto fresh clay. Whatever they copied, he kept. This particular tablet came from older source material. The scribes who produced it were not composing something new. They were transcribing something that already existed, something that predated their own civilization by a margin they did not specify, something they treated with a caution reserved for texts that carry consequence. The tablet is catalogued. It sits in the British Museum under the designation K6077. Most researchers who have examined it describe it as administrative in nature, a classification roster of human types and their assigned categories. That description is accurate as far as it goes. What it leaves out is the column on the right face of the tablet, the one that specifies, for each human category, what that category is shielded from, not what they are for, what they are protected against. The Sumerians appeared in southern Mesopotamia around 3500 BC. That date is not approximate. The archaeological record is precise enough to say that within a span of roughly 2 centuries, a population that had been building mud huts was constructing cities with multi-story temples, writing in a fully formed script, practicing advanced metallurgy, operating a legal code, and conducting astronomical observations sophisticated enough to track celestial cycles across centuries. The transition phase has never been found. There is no primitive writing that gradually became complex. The Sumerians arrived in the historical record essentially complete, as though someone had installed them there. Their own explanation was simple. They did not claim to have developed their civilization independently. They claimed it was given to them, by beings they called the Anunnaki, a term that translates roughly as those who came from the heavens to the earth. The Anunnaki, according to Sumerian theology, were not gods in the modern religious sense. They were not omnipotent or eternal. They possessed technology the Sumerians could only describe in terms of celestial mechanics. But they also argued with each other, formed factions, made mistakes, and had clearly defined areas of authority. They were administrators, managers of a project. The Atrahasis epic, recovered across multiple tablet fragments, describes the Anunnaki as beings who arrived on Earth and put their own kind to work mining. When that labor force rebelled, they created a replacement. They called it the Lulu, the primitive worker, created by combining biological material from this planet with something of their own. The Lulu worked, it reproduced, and eventually the relationship between the Anunnaki and their created workforce became complicated enough that the texts begin describing differentiation. Different categories of humans, different designations, different fates. K6077 is one of the texts that records that differentiation. The tablet is approximately 23 centimeters long and 15 centimeters wide. It was fired, not sun-dried, which indicates the scribes considered it worth preserving under heat and pressure. The cuneiform inscription covers both faces. The front face contains a catalog of 7 human designations, each followed by functional descriptors, a line about purpose, and a line about lineage. The back face is what matters. The back face contains what the original scribes labeled, in the header line, as the Namtila clause. Namtila is Sumerian for life preservation, or more precisely, the condition of being kept living. The clause appears as a series of entries, one for each of the 7 designations on the front, specifying what each designation is shielded against. The standard academic reading classifies the Namtila clause as apotropaic ritual, protective magic. That reading is not wrong exactly, it's incomplete. Because the things the tablet says certain human designations are protected from are not demons or disease spirits. They are events, specific, physical events. The first entry says, protected from the time of erasure when the water comes from above and below. The second, held apart from the harvesting that follows the darkening. The third, sealed against the fire that moves across the ground at the time of renewal. These are not metaphors, they are operational specifications. Quick pause, and this is something new. For the first time since the 12 codes, there's a second document. It's called the 7 resets every time the world was erased, matched against the Namtila clause, and the checklist of signs for the 8th 4 are already active. Linked below, QR code on screen. That's all back to the video. The 7 designations in K6077 each carry a different protection profile. Some overlap, some are distinct, But across all 7, a pattern emerges that is difficult to attribute to coincidence or purely symbolic intent. The first designation is Ki, Ag, favored of the earth, the same root that appears in older K-series tablets in connection with marked human origins. The Nam Tila clause for Ki. Ag reads, shielded against the erasure of memory, the breaking of lineage, and the fire that moves at renewal. Erasure of memory in Sumerian administrative texts means deliberate record destruction, the kind that follows the end of a dynasty or the clearing of a population center. Breaking of lineage means the interruption of genetic continuity, a concept the Sumerians treated with the same administrative seriousness they applied to property transfer and temple endowment. Fire that moves at renewal appears in the Atrahasis epic, specifically as one of the mechanisms used in what that text calls the Great Corrections. The second designation is An, dim, shaped by heaven. Protection clause, held apart from the harvesting that follows the darkening, sealed against the removal of the marked. Harvesting here is not agricultural. In Sumerian administrative language, harvesting describes the collection of specific human types for purposes the texts decline to specify. The phrase "the removal of the marked" appears in no other publicly translated K-series tablet. It implies a category of humans who are marked, a distinct process by which the marked are removed, and a separate category of humans shielded from that removal by virtue of already being accounted for in a ledger the Anunnaki maintained. The third designation is Nam, En, Lordship of Fate. Protection, preserved through the time of fire from above, held against the sickness that follows the shaking of the foundations. Fire from above is explicit. Sickness after the shaking of the foundations appears in Sumerian texts associated with major seismic events and the disruption of underground water systems, corresponding to what we now understand about how large seismic activity contaminates aquifers and destroys food-producing land. The 4th through 6th designations carry progressively simpler protection clauses, overlapping with the first 3 in most categories but specifying different survival conditions. Different criteria for what constitutes surviving a reset event successfully enough to reconstitute the genetic line on the other side of it. The 7th designation, placed last and marked separately with a double line above it, carries only 2 protections. But they are the 2 that appear nowhere else in the tablet, shielded from the knowledge of what approaches, and held apart from the grief of those who are not sealed. That second clause has no parallel in any published Sumerian text. Not held apart from the grief of the unsealed, which would imply survival alongside observer pain. Held apart from it entirely, as though the protection extends not just to physical survival but to the psychological experience of knowing what is coming. Whatever is coming, the humans in the 7th designation will not know it until it has passed. Their protection includes their ignorance of it. The administrative framing of this clause is important. The Sumerians were precise writers. They did not produce loose or lyrical administrative language. When K 6077 says the 7th designation is held apart from the grief of the unsealed, it is specifying a condition with the same precision another tablet would use to specify the volume of barley in a temple storehouse. The condition is real, its effects are measurable, and it applies to a category of humans who exist in this text as a distinct population group with a distinct fate, a category the tablet says is alive and carrying that condition now. The question of how designation was assigned is addressed in a companion tablet the British Museum catalogued as K 6078. Recovered in the same excavation context as K 6077, clearly explanatory material for the primary document. K 6078 describes the selection process in terms of 3 criteria. The first is blood lineage, specifically what the text calls the unbroken thread, a term that appears in Sumerian medical and genealogical texts to mean a genetic line that has not been interrupted by what the tablet calls foreign introduction. Foreign introduction is the Sumerian administrative phrase for the mixing of the original created type with populations that do not carry the Anunnaki biological contribution. The second criterion is what the text calls the inner mark. This is where the tablet becomes precise in a way that resists comfortable interpretation. The inner mark is described not as a spiritual quality but as a physical attribute, something that exists in the body at a level below what ancient medicine could directly examine. The text uses the word dumuzi, seed of life, in a context that places it inside the human body as a carried object rather than a generational trait. The seed of life is something you either have or do not have. It is not acquired. It is not earned. It is heritable only imperfectly. 2 parents who carry it can produce a child that does not, and under specific circumstances the tablet declines to elaborate. Two parents without it can produce a child who does. That imperfect heritability describes a real genetic behavior. Traits that appear and disappear across generations without following dominant or recessive patterns are well documented in modern genetics. Epigenetic markers and mitochondrial inheritance patterns are mechanisms by which a heritable trait can skip generations, surface in unexpected lineages, and resist simple prediction. The Sumerians did not have vocabulary for these mechanisms. They described the outcome in the vocabulary they had, the seed of life, heritable but imperfect, physical but invisible to ancient examination. The third criterion K6078 calls AN, TA, above or heavenly, but paired here with a phrase that translates as the receiver of the descending attention. The receiver of the descending attention is a human who has had direct contact with an Anunnaki presence. The text describes this in administrative terms, as though the Anunnaki maintained a periodic practice of direct contact with certain humans, a kind of census process, during which the contact altered something in the human's physical composition in a way that activated the inner mark. The selection mechanism K6078 describes as a heritable biological marker, placed by an external intelligence, periodically renewed through contact, and tracked across generations in a tablet at the administrative level of the civilization the Anunnaki built. Whatever the Anunnaki actually were, that is a description of a real system. The text is not vague, it's precise. And precision in Sumerian administrative documents is never accidental. Before we move on to the protections, stop for a second. What you just heard about the criteria only makes sense on the full timeline next to the 6 resets before it. The marker, the contact, it's all in the 7 resets, linked below. Grab it, come back, what's next builds on it. QR code is on your screen. The Namtilla clause, in K6077 names, 3 primary threat categories across all 7 designations. Understanding what those threats describe requires reading K6077 alongside Sumerian texts that are almost never presented together in academic literature, because presenting them together produces a picture that mainstream scholarship does not have a comfortable way to categorize or dismiss. The first threat type is the erasure event. In K6077, this appears as the time of erasure, when the water comes from above and below. In the Atrahasis epic, the same event is described from a narrative perspective. The Great Flood, sent by Enlil, designed to reset the human population. In the Sumerian King List, a document that catalogs the reigns of rulers in Mesopotamian cities from the earliest recorded period onward, there is a single line separating the antediluvian kings from the post-diluvian kings. The line reads, "The flood swept over. Then kingship descended again from heaven." The King List does not treat the flood as a religious event. It treats it as an administrative reset. Kingship was interrupted, then it was restarted. The humans who restarted it had to come from somewhere. K6077 specifies the criteria for who those humans were. The second threat type is what K6077 calls the harvesting that follows the darkening. The darkening in Sumerian cosmological texts refers to an extended period of reduced solar output associated with dust or particulate obstruction of the sky. Following a darkening event, human population numbers would drop drastically due to agricultural failure and resource competition. K6077 suggests that a darkening level event also creates conditions under which the Anunnaki conducted what the text calls a harvesting to a collection of certain human types. For purposes the tablet does not specify, but that K6078 suggests have to do with preservation of the genetic lines the Anunnaki considered most valuable. The seal designations are protected from this harvesting not because they are removed in it, but because they are already marked, already recorded in a ledger that predates the event itself. That distinction matters. They are not saved during the harvest. They were never on the harvest list. The ledger that protects them was written before the darkening event was anticipated, not in response to it. The third threat type is fire that moves across the ground at the time of renewal. This is the most physically specific entry in the Namtil Law column. Fire that moves across the ground is not volcanic activity, which Sumerian texts describe in different terms involving earth opening and the rising of liquid stone. It is a surface-level thermal event with directional movement. The time of renewal in Sumerian cosmological texts refers to the period immediately following a reset event, when the Earth's surface is being reconstituted for the next cycle of organized civilization. This fire has been interpreted by some researchers as referencing impact events, specifically airburst-type impacts that create fast-moving ground fires across wide areas without leaving a central crater. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, first proposed seriously in 2007 and since supported by sediment evidence from multiple continents, describes exactly this type of event at approximately 12,900 years ago. The sealed designations are held against this event specifically, not protected from the reset itself, but from the fire that moves in its aftermath. The problem with dismissing K 6077 as mythology is that the physical record keeps producing things that mythology alone should not be able to predict with this level of specificity. The Younger Dryas boundary layer had not been identified when K 6077 was first catalogued in 1891. The Younger Dryas boundary layer, the sediment horizon dated to approximately 12,900 years ago, has now been identified at over 50 sites across 4 continents. It contains elevated concentrations of platinum group elements, spherules of melted silica, nanodiamonds, and charcoal signatures indicating widespread simultaneous burning. This is not a regional volcanic event. It is a global horizon with a consistent chemical signature pointing to an impact or a series of impacts. The event happened, and it corresponds within the margin of Sumerian chronological uncertainty to the flood event in the Atrahasis epic and to the reset point in the Sumerian king list. Something ended, organized human activity at that boundary. Something reconstituted it afterward. The Sumerians say the reconstitution was deliberate, that certain humans were preserved through the event because they had been prepared for it in advance. The preparation was not practical. There are no instructions for building boats or storing grain in K 6077. The preparation was biological and administrative. K 6077 is a record of who was already enrolled. Beyond the Younger Dryas evidence, the population genetics of ancient Mesopotamia, studied through ancient DNA analysis of skeletal remains from multiple sites and time periods, show a population that does not fit neatly into the migration and admixture models used to explain the genetics of surrounding groups. The Sumerians show a genetic signature that is distinct, that persists with unusual stability across the period of their civilization, and that does not blend into neighboring populations the way you would expect from normal cultural and biological interaction. The distinctness is not extreme, but it is consistent, and it is consistent in exactly the way you would expect from a population that maintained deliberate genetic criteria across many generations. Then there is the Sumerian astronomical record. The Mol Apin star catalog, now understood to be a copy of Sumerian originals, documents stellar positions and astronomical periods with an accuracy not matched in European astronomy until the 17th century. The Sumerians either had a long observational tradition that left no physical trace, or they received knowledge from a source that had already done that observation over a time frame outside known human history. K 6077 fits the second possibility better than the first. The academic history of K 6077 is its own story. The tablet was catalogued by Wallace Budge at the British Museum in 1891. Budge was the most prolific Assyriologist of his generation, a man who acquired tens of thousands of objects for the museum and published extensively on most of them. He noted K 6077 in his acquisition records and described the Namtil Law Clause in a private letter to a colleague as containing language of unusual specificity that did not conform to standard apotropaic formula. He did not publish a full translation. The next serious scholarly attention came from Friedrich Delitzsch, who examined the tablet in 1902 during preparation of his controversial lecture series Babel und Bibel. Delitzsch was interested in the relationship between Babylonian religious texts and the Hebrew Bible. K 6077 appears in his private notes, deposited after his death in the Berlin State Library, with a notation that the protection clauses bore examination alongside flood narrative variants from other K-series tablets. He did not include K 6077 in his published lectures. In the 1950s, Samuel Noah Kramer at the University of Pennsylvania, arguably the most important American Sumerologist of the 20th century, compiled a comprehensive catalog of K-series tablets with potential relevance to Sumerian cosmological texts. K 6077 appears in his catalog with a brief entry describing it as an administrative classification document with ritual appendix. Kramer's published translations of Sumerian texts are foundational to the field. He never translated K 6077 fully. His correspondence, archived at the University of Pennsylvania, includes a letter from a British Museum colleague referring to the tablet as one that resisted comfortable categorization. Resistant to comfortable categorization is not an accusation of suppression. Academics leave things untranslated for many reasons: competing priorities, linguistic uncertainty, the sheer volume of untranslated cuneiform still in institutional collections. By current estimates, there are over 500,000 cuneiform tablets that have never been fully published in any language. But K. 6077 is not an obscure find. It came from the same excavation context as some of the most discussed tablets in Mesopotamian scholarship. It has been examined by multiple major figures in the field over more than a century. And the content, each of them flagged as unusual, is precisely the content that has never appeared in a published English translation. If the Nam to La clause in K 6077 means what it appears to mean, then several things follow that are worth examining without flinching. The first is that the Anunnaki operated on a long-range planning horizon. The protection clauses in K 6077 are not reactive. They describe a category of humans pre-designated for survival through events that had not yet occurred at the time of designation. That implies either prophetic knowledge or engineering knowledge. If you know that a particular type of event will occur because you have observed it before, or because you control the cycles that produce it, you can prepare a population for it in advance. The Anunnaki texts consistently describe beings who operate on timescales that dwarf human generations. K 6077 is consistent with that picture. A document prepared for a future that, from the perspective of the humans living when it was written, had not yet arrived. The second implication is that the marker is still present in the human population. K 6078 describes it as heritable, imperfectly but persistently. If the sealed designation survived, the reset events the tablet describes, and if the marker is heritable, then some portion of the current human population carries it. The tablet does not specify how large that portion is. It does not specify how to identify it, beyond the criteria in K 6078, two of which require genealogical records that almost certainly no longer exist. The third criterion, the inner mark, might now be detectable with tools the Sumerians did not have. Modern genetic analysis has already found anomalies in human populations that conventional evolutionary theory does not explain well. The third implication is the most uncomfortable. The seventh designation's protection clause specifies that the sealed humans are held apart from the knowledge of what approaches. Whatever the next correction event is, the humans sealed against it are living right now in the same unawareness the tablet says is part of their protection, held apart from the grief of those who are not sealed, not by location, not by preparation, by something written into them before they were born. The protection is not something you activate, it is something you either carry or you do not. K 6077 is not a prophecy, it is a record. Records document what happened and what was already arranged. The Sumerians did not write it to warn you. They wrote it to preserve information about a system already in place when they received it. The system does not require your belief to function. The marker does not require your awareness to be present. The Nam to La clause does not ask anything of the humans it describes. It just says that certain humans are protected, and that they will not know what they were protected from until after it has passed. The tablet is in London. The clause is there. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen.